Welcome to Product Rising. I'm Elizabeth Ames, the executive producer of Product Rising, and I'm excited today to launch a new monthly series, In the Lead. The series will be hosted by Carmen Palmer, the CEO of Women in Product, and this new series will share conversations with a wide range of industry leaders. Our aim is to get their personal insights about tech, product, and how to navigate a successful career. We hope you'll join us the second Tuesday of each month for this series. If you like what you hear, please follow us. To kick us off, Carmen speaks with Deb Liu. Deb is a tech executive, an advisor, a board member. She is currently a board member at Intuit and most recently the CEO of Ancestry. Prior to Ancestry, Deb spent over 11 years at Facebook, including roles as Vice President of Platform and Marketplace, as well as Facebook App and Commerce. Deb is also the author of a popular Substack, Perspectives, and of the book, Take Back Your Power, 10 New Rules for Women at Work. Deb is a founder and the board chair at Women in Product. And with that, I'll turn it over to Carmen and Deb.
I'm happy to have Deb Liu on our podcast today. Welcome, Deb.
It's great to be here.
I'm actually really excited we're having this conversation at the beginning of the year. I think a lot of your reflections on 2025 being a year of change, a year of yes, and how we reflect on that and how we come into this new year. So I think it's a great time for us to kick this off. You've really led at the highest levels of tech. You've shaped products used by billions of folks, and now you're writing, advising, starting a new company. And at the same time, you're really deeply reflective in what you share with the community and our industry at large. So I really appreciate your clarity. It's not just talking about what you do, but, we've worked together and I really love that you always bring the frameworks and the questions and the stories. And so I'm excited to really bring that to our folks and jump in today. So with that, I'd really like to start with, how are you going to measure and define your success coming into this new year? And how has that definition of success really evolved for you over time?
Well, I think we live in a time and environment where we're so much defined by our LinkedIn profile, right? What title we have there, what companies we worked at, like a bingo card of like, what did we share? What awards did we get? And it's almost like our resume is who we are, and our job title is a definition of who we are. And so I read this article, which was called the Blank Name Tag Club, which was, we were at a Women in Product event, and Avni and I were sitting there, and she's like, what do we grade under our name? And I had just left Ancestry, and then a friend of ours walks up, and I said, you know what? We can leave our name tags blank. And Avni goes to Sandy, is like, join the blank name tag club. And so, I think so often it's like who we are is defined by what's underneath our name and what company we're associated with, what job title we have with it. And suddenly when that's gone, who are we? And so this was a great year to reflect, because I took some time off after stepping down as a CEO of Ancestry after 4 years. And I didn't want to have anything after my name because I wanted to have everything, all the opportunities, all the things you could see. And so I tried a bunch of things. I did all the things that I felt like I didn't have time to do previously, and it was amazing. I consulted with some companies, I advised some companies, I did some investing, I talked to tons of folks in various industries. I learned so much from the experience, and it just felt like it was a time of learning and exploring, and I felt like I hadn't done that since college and business school. And so I come into this year with great energy and great clarity because I had a chance to do all of those things where I knew what to say no to now and what to say yes to.
Well, I think the being able to say no to the things really enables us to do the things that, we never really had the opportunity to do, and to lean into that. So I suppose that moment of really understanding what that redefinition of success, was it that moment during that Women in Product whip mix, or was there something even before that where this sort of, hey, this is a moment where I really need to look back and say, hey, I did all these things, but I have new muscles to exercise?
Well, actually, that moment was the reason I started working on my new book. which is about how to strategically navigate transitions. I think we're not good at transitions. I've always been super bad at it, right? It's like I graduated from business school. The next week I started a new job. Then I left, I started at PayPal, and then I went to eBay. Like left on Friday, went on Monday to a new job, left on Friday at eBay, went to Facebook on a Monday, did the same thing, closed my computer during COVID one day, and then opened the computer as the CEO of a company, and it was just like a crazy back to back adventure. And yet I felt like I never had time to breathe. And I think part of life is actually finding space to breathe and explore. And so, and having that energy. And so it led me that actual moment where it's like, what happens when you're not defined by who you have been? And it caused me really, and I wrote this as part of the book, that was the impetus for me to really think about transitions, celebrating what happened, reflecting on it, packing it away, and then reflecting on where I want to go from there.
That's amazing. I don't want to give away too much of the book, but from a transitions perspective, like since I'm sure many folks have experienced the taking 2 days off and then starting a new big job. If you were to do it differently in that transition, what would you do differently?
Well, first, I think it's hard. Like the way that we do work here is that, you have to find a job while you're already in a job, right? And you just don't have time to even think. I have a friend who likes to take personal sabbaticals. She just takes like 3 days off and drives someplace and parks, and she writes about it. She just like says, you know what? She takes time to think. And I feel like in this kind of hamster wheel, you can't get off long enough to think, is this the right thing for me? You just go. And look, it's a necessity. Like you have to make money. A lot of companies are like, you have to start immediately. But actually having a moment to breathe for yourself and say, what did I learn from this last experience? And what do I hope going in is like a really important reflection. So I tell people, even if you just take the weekend, go away. And I actually wrote a framework, and I've been testing out this framework. So if anyone wants the framework, we can include it in the show notes. I shared this framework with a lot of people because I want to test it out, which is just hitting reset first. Before you plunge into the next thing, hit reset and actually say, what did I learn from this experience? And what story am I telling myself about that experience? And then what are the things I need to let go of? Because a lot of people are also fighting the last war. I was talking to 2 women CEOs who had, they had a really rough first outing, not because of them, but because of activist investors and other things. And they came back and did another CEO job. And I asked them what made them come back. And they said, it was unfinished business. Both of them said the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and for them, it was like they had something they wanted to prove. And I thought as long as they did that with clarity, that's great. I think a lot of people, and both of them clearly had thought a lot about this as we were talking. But then there are a lot of people who just plunge into the next job and they're fighting the last war. Right? They didn't feel supported by their manager. So they are constantly checking, like, am I being supported? They felt like they weren't promoted fast enough. So they're always like asking about the next promotion. And I'm like, take a step back and actually ask yourself, like, am I fighting the last war? And is that really what the next battle is really about? Or am I running away or am I going toward? And I think often we're so, you just get on this treadmill of like, okay, I'm going to, I felt like I wasn't promoted very quickly. And I talk about promotion a lot in my writings. And so then you're just like pushing. But is that at the expense of your work? Is that at the expense of other people? How are you thinking, processing? Now, if you ask me when I was promoted to various things, I don't even remember. Like, it doesn't matter, right? Is that the thing that we're going to think about later in life? And so it seems so important at the time, though.
Absolutely. I think that that's a important perspective of being able to pause and reflect and look at like what got you to where you were, as you said, and then take that moment to what is the next thing, and be really intentional about what you wouldn't do and what you might change. And that's really great. And being able to run to the thing that you really want to be at and not run from. So I think I wanted to dig into that. Like, so can you tell a story about something that you've worked on that, maybe was a disaster, didn't go the way that you wanted to? And what did you learn from it? And how did it change? How did this play into how you lead and make decisions today?
Well, so here's the thing. So, most people know that I've built Facebook Marketplace. I was interviewing in 2009 at Facebook, and I said, I wanted to build a Facebook Marketplace. I told Cheryl at the interview, even though I was interviewing for a totally different job, by the way. And I was like, we should build a Facebook marketplace, a marketplace at Facebook. And at the time, there was not even groups. Like it was a very simple product. And I think she was wondering what I was doing because I'm like literally pitching her a different product. But I come in, I get the job, I work in payments and then games, and I worked in ads, and I did all of these things. I did different products. And every year I'm like, we should build a Facebook marketplace. I keep pitching it at every, like new idea competition, every hackathon. And I finally got a chance to build it. We start working on it in 2015 and we launched it in October 2016. And I looked this up because the headline in the New York Times the day we launched was Facebook Marketplace goes wrong, sex, guns, and baby hedgehogs.
Oh my goodness.
If you look it up, it's on October 5th, 2016. And it was the day we launched. And it was an unmitigated disaster.
Wow.
What I learned from that experience was, what I loved about Facebook and the way that the company was run was there was no blame game. It was like, hey, this didn't go well. Let's figure out what happened and let's move on. Because, nothing is defined by one day. And I really appreciated that, which was, did it go absolutely wrong? There was an issue with one of the fraud filters. And anyway, the point was we did a postmortem of what happened, but then we kept going. You're not defined by the first day of your launch. You're defined. It's kind of like defining your 40-year marriage by their wedding. I just think that that's the wrong way of thinking about it. It's the same thing with the product. Defining your product by the first day of your launch is like the wrong way to go. Instead, reputations are built one day at a time. And so, yes, did it suck that this was the headline? I still have screenshots just to remind myself, like, not everything goes right all the time. And it's the same thing. Like you will, make mistakes. You will have the wrong product strategy. You will, deliver the wrong thing. And you know what? That doesn't define you. You're not defined by the worst thing, the worst launch. In fact, 1 billion people use the product and nobody remembers what happened the day of the launch, even though the day of the launch was so bad. And many people sent me that article. And the dream that I had for like 7 years launched to ignominious, beginning. And then went on to actually change people's lives. And so, it's a reminder that, we are more than one thing that happened to us.
Absolutely. So, but for our audience, I think being able to look back on it and knowing where it is now from that very first day, I'm sure our audience would want to know, what were you feeling when that article came to you? Were you in that state of this is just the first day? Or
I think at the day it was like, we have to figure out what happens because things that were like clearly against our policy were showing up on the day of launch. And so it turns out it was a bug. It was a small bug that like cascaded. And again, we were in crisis mode with like, let's just like fix this and clean this up. But, at the day of, obviously I was not enlightened enough to be like, okay, this too shall pass. But I had to leave the team knowing this was day one. It didn't mean that day 1,000 and day 10,000 was going to be, it was going to be the same way.
Absolutely. I mean, when you go through experiences like that, and it was great that you had like this, the framework and support of your organization to say, okay, what is actually happening and what went wrong? Those types of situations, I think, probably help to strengthen sort of your risk tolerance and the way that you look at uncertainty and how do you approach it. Do you have any advice or guidance for folks who maybe didn't grow up with, they may have grown up with like a lot of perfectionism and a lot of like fear of failure or not very much of a space of risk tolerance? How do you get that over time when you're first starting out or you're partway through your career?
One of the things that I wrote about in my book, which is, the people who are the most successful are not the people who didn't fail. It was the people who overcame the failure. And they've actually done studies on this. I did a bunch of research for my book around this, where people who early in their career applied for an NIH grant and got it versus those who didn't get their first grant. The people who were just below the line actually ended up with more successful careers because they failed, they retooled, they went on to do more than even the people who succeeded on the very edge. So the point is, actually failure, it's kind of like I write about the biosphere. They had all these trees in there and they realized these trees would get really tall and then they would snap and just fall over. And they were like, they couldn't figure out why. So the biosphere was when they had a self-contained ecosystem in, I think it was Arizona. where they had humans there, and then they grew like various plants. And what they realized is the biosphere has no wind, it has no weather, right? Because it's completely covered. And trees grow strong because the wind and the rain actually force them to bend. It creates micro tears in the bark. And those micro tears actually become a type of scar tissue that makes them really strong. And that's how they're able to get really tall. And so they realized that it's not adversity we should avoid. It's actually our response to adversity is to build perseverance. And those who build perseverance are the most successful. And so I think hard about that story because, if you lived if you're, let's just say your parents like smooth everything out. And a lot of kids, like we live in an area where parents will just like smooth everything out for their kids, right? Like everything is done for them. They don't have chores. And we actually want our kids to understand perseverance. Joe said this is why we make them fly basic economy. We all fly basic economy. Because, we want them to understand that, it gets you to the same place and there's a price difference. And we show them, we don't just buy tickets. We actually show them the price difference. And then we tell them they get to decide how we fly. And then we give them the difference to spend on other things. And it's kind of because they joked like, hey, we're sending $400 a ticket to Taiwan. Can we spend it in the night market? I'm like, there's no way you can spend $400 in the night market. You can't spend $40 in the night market in Taiwan because everything is so cheap. But sure, like, let's go. I'll give you $40. But the point is showing them what choices are. I think often we try to make everything too smooth. Like managers make things too easy. And I said this actually to a PM I worked with where he couldn't get promoted. He was working on marketing tools. And the marketing team kept saying, no, we don't really support his promotion. I couldn't figure out. He was doing so much work for them. I needed their support or I couldn't get him promoted because they were his business partners. And finally, I asked somebody in marketing who I knew, I was like, why would you not want to promote him? They're like, well, he doesn't do that much for us. And I realized he made it look too easy. He wasn't showing the work. And so he was doing the work. He was solving their problems. But then he'd come in the meeting. He's like, I took care of that. And I went to him and I said, you're not showing your work. You're doing the work. And yet nobody sees it. You're making it look too easy. They don't see how hard you're fighting for them, how many hours you're putting in to get, their stuff prioritized. I see it because I'm your manager. And I would do a disservice by not actually meeting with them first to try to figure out why they were opposed to your promotion. And so you think about that, right? It's like one of the things I think is really important is both rising above the adversity, but also figuring out how to show your work so people understand the challenge and so they can help you as well.
Absolutely. That makes so much sense. I mean, you can liken that to when you're doing a math problem, like a calculus problem. You don't want just the answer the teacher is going to grade you on.
Well, that's what ChatGPT is doing. It's like they give you the answer, but you'll have no idea how you got there.
Yeah.
And that's what's terrifying about AI is it gets the answer and it's too easy, but it's really the process that you're learning. It's kind of like you don't just immediately give kids a calculator when they're 3 and be like, punch this in and get the answer. You have to memorize your multiplication tables. You have to understand long division. And I feel like, if you get to the shortcut, you don't understand long division. You didn't understand how, so they give you a different calculator. It's reverse Polish notation. You don't even understand how to punch it in because you didn't understand the basic math because all you did was just punch in numbers. And that's terrifying because it's the foundation on which your house is built. And if you have a weak and shaky foundation, you're not going to get to the place you want to go.
Absolutely. So you've spoken a little bit about some of the product managers that you've managed and the industry overall in this AI era. We know that there are different skills. There are core skills as a product manager, as a product leader that are required. But in today's environment, what quality do you most look for if you were hiring product managers now? And I guess, how do you think that that's shifted comparatively since the technology has really evolved?
Well, so here's the challenge, which is it used to be like the product role was like super well defined, right? It was like, okay, the product manager did this, the engineer did this, you had a researcher, you had an analyst, you might have a designer, content strategist, a program manager. Everybody had their role. And suddenly now with AI, all the roles are collapsing because, it used to be you had to get a designer to create, picture perfect pixels. Well, you know what's really good at that? Having the PMs are now doing that in a lot of startups because they're like, well, do we need a full-time designer? Do you really need a full-time PM if you have a designer who can think through a product problem? And so on and so forth. Now, like product managers can do research because, you can do some really basic research before you go out to market Do you need to, maybe you wait to hire someone to help you research? Now you can do data analysis in a way that previously couldn't done. Do you really need, as many analysts? And suddenly the whole supply chain of all the things, all the pieces of the recipe that needed to make a great product is collapsing in various places. And it's unclear, so the people who are going to rise to the top are the people who are most adaptable. They're the ones who are going to learn the most. They're going to push the envelope. They're going to think outside the box. And I see that adaptable thinking. We were once a world of experts where everybody was an expert in their thing. And together it was like, the difference between playing an orchestra and playing jazz, right? It's like orchestra, everybody had a role, everyone had the sheet music. It sounded amazing. You need a lot of people, but jazz sounds amazing. And it's like improvisation. And people a lot of jazz musicians play different instruments and so but it moves a lot faster. And yet the skill set is very different. And so the question is, are you playing an orchestra or are you playing jazz? Right? Are you adapting and learning and picking up different instruments? Are you going with the flow with your team? Or you're like, hey, look, I am first violin and this is the music I play and I am going to be great at it. And there's a lot of places where you'll be successful in doing that. But I think that more and more tech companies are looking for people who are able to improvise and learn new skills. And I think adaptability is never, never a bad thing.
I think that's amazing. I think that all of this is so fitting. You're exactly right. There is sort of some structure, obviously your keys and your time signature, but you fill it in between the lines and do improv. I think it's amazing. I love that analogy. I think so. One thing that is related to that as well. So we talk about like the skill sets and what do we think is most important. So certainly adaptability, but if we look at organizations today, I'd love to get your thoughts on where do you think product is going to live and where is it going to sit and be most effective in our organizations today? I think that's like one of the questions that I can constantly get asked within the community.
I think the biggest thing is the people who know the customers and customer needs the best are always going to be required. And that means, whether it's an enterprise customer actually sitting in and listening into conversations and really understanding deeply what the tool set is, or a consumer, like really understanding both seeing qualitative and quantitative data, because there is going to always be a person who has to interpret both the user needs and user wants to a product, but also monetization. Like, how do you actually support that and have a business model? Those are two critical areas that you can't get away from that, right? I talk to a lot of AI startups, obviously in the AI startup ecosystem, and a lot of them I realize have built amazing technology, but don't understand what their customers want or can pay for. And it's fascinating. We built something where our startup was really focused on B2C, and we actually pivoted to B2B because we just talked to a ton of customers. And, one of our investors said, hey, do you want to explore B2B? And we said, you know what, that's worthwhile. We did a 2-week sprint where we just called everybody we knew. And at the end, we had like commitments, of over $2 million. And we're like,
Amazing.
hey, so I think we're pivoting. But the point is, are you close to the customer? Do you understand? It's the same exact platform, by the way. With the technology we built is not substantially different, but applying it to the right customer who has the need. What is the burning platform? And I think it's really the product managers who deeply understand what it is that customers need and are willing to pay for. I think that we missed that last part. I feel like venture funding can get you so far, but ultimately monetization is still an important part of the strategy. And you see a lot of startups get stuck where they just can't get monetization right. You can have the best idea that doesn't work.
Absolutely.
And so, those are two areas where deep customer needs, where you're getting engagement, you're getting value, you're creating value, and then figuring out how to have we call it equitable value exchange. I used to work in Facebook platform. Equitable value exchange is like, is everybody, both the consumer, the developer, and, the company, like a platform, getting enough value?
Absolutely. I think that as you talk about this, it comes back to the core thing we've always thought is know your customer well. Who is your target customer and how do you actually launch and have them understand what your product is and make sure that matches up? I think when you were scaling Marketplace and you were leading at Ancestry, how did you make sure that the product roles had that strategic seat at the table? I think there's some very clearly defined roles and that's evolving. And I think it's different in different sizes of companies. like as a product person, maybe who's transitioning, how do you ensure that they have that seat at the table? Like how do they put themselves forward and ensure that they're the ones who are really sharing like what is the needs of the customer and what should this product be doing?
I remember there was a chart that a friend of mine that she showed me when we were doing a talk together, and it was like the org chart of the company she was at. I think it was one of these big old tech companies, and she said, find out, if this company has been around for a long time, who makes it into the C-suite and who makes it to the CEO and who
Hmm.
they support on the board. And so for that company, because it was a massive B2B sales enterprise company, it was always a sales leader who was at the top. And she said, if you want to go to the top, you have to do a stint in sales. And so she said, look, like organizations, you can tell what they're looking for by who they put into leadership. And where do all the GMs come from, right? Are they coming from the business side? Are they coming from the tech side? Are they coming from the sales side? And she said, that's where you know where value is coming from. And so, if you join a company where product is king, like that, great. Okay. Like it's very clear. But I remember, there was a time at Google, it was a very tech heavy company. And so they wanted all of their PMs to also have engineering degrees, right? Because they were really there to help the engineers be successful. And so some companies, by the way, completely run by business people. It's like MBAs come in and, it doesn't matter what you build. It just matters like, can you actually, sell it, right? And you can tell from those companies as well. And so first pick a company where you feel like you're okay with where product sits. Like obviously not every company is product driven. So if you join a company where it's very business driven, are you a good business thinker? Are you going to be valued at that table? I think a lot of times we join companies because the product is cool or, because it's an interesting role, but really think hard about kind of what role you play and are you going to be frustrated? I've worked at companies that were very business unit driven and then others that were very product driven and, some that were marketing driven. And so really kind of understanding what your role is and then being okay with it. And then second, to get a seat at the table, speak the language of the people on the other side.
Yeah.
I often talk about how, don't focus on what you're going to say, focus on how it's going to land. What is the other side? What's the other person hearing from you? What is landing? I think a lot of times we get inside our own heads. It's like, no, I need to say these things to prove, I was talking to somebody, I was coaching her and she's like, I feel like I need to prove myself by like being super technical because I'm proving my chops. And I'm like, yes, but it's not understandable. Your job is to make it understandable, not to prove that you're technical because you're already there. I don't think that's the problem. And so, and again, she's somebody who's fighting the last war, right? Because she was criticized for not being technical enough in her previous job. So that's the kind of thing where, like, how do you, create the ability to really like sit in the other shoes? What you want to hear in the position? What would persuade you? Look for other people's motives. And everyone's motives are very different. Like, there are people I've worked with who really wanted to get promoted. It didn't mean that they weren't good at their jobs. It meant that the thing that was the thorn in their side was getting promoted. And so I went to one person, I said, let's get you there. Like, let's work together to get you there. And suddenly our relationship changed because I understood it took me a long time to understand what was driving them, that I think they had a chip on their shoulder from getting passed over. And so I think a lot of leadership is like empathy and sitting in someone else's shoes.
I love that. I was just reflecting back that there's so many great pieces of advice and tidbits in all of this, Deb. So I'm really enjoying the discussion and the frameworks and the examples. So given what we've talked about, I do want to understand from your perspective, what do you think right now for, our audience of product leaders as things are shifting? What do you think is like the biggest opportunity for product leaders in tech right now? And the question is really around, there are a lot of opportunities. And to your point, there are different types of companies and companies are being run in different types of ways. Whether, like you said, is it business driven? Is it more product driven? Is it more tech driven? What do you see as the biggest opportunities for product leaders in tech today?
Well, I think that, it's, I worry that too many product managers, especially women product managers, are sitting out the AI revolution. Part of what I did this past year was I just wanted to learn AI. And I was like, and I'm not training deep LLMs, but just understanding what's possible with AI. And, I took a boot camp class. I coded some stuff, like coded, pseudocode coded some stuff. But like, I now understand what is possible and how it can apply to companies, how it can apply to individuals. And now I can see the possibilities in a way that I previously couldn't see. And so first, women use AI 10 percentage points less than men do in the workplace. And they did a study, I think this was a Wall Street Journal article about this. This is what came out, where it said it was because women are often questioned around their credibility and they feel like the AI is cheating, maybe, or something like that. But I think like it's like saying I don't use search because it's cheating because I want to use the yellow pages. Like, really, so I I think AI is a tool like any other. It's not the answer. It is a one thing in an arsenal, but if you don't use it. So I did this talk at NASDAQ where I was speaking about how like, 3 years, it's been 3 years since ChatGPT came out and everything seemed to change. 3 years after the AI, the internet revolution was 1998. And a bunch of people were sitting around and I'm sure that they were, working at Sears and, travel companies and Barnes and Noble. And they were like, oh, hey, like there's this internet thing, right? And what are we going to do about it? And companies are facing that right now. It's like, what am I going to do about it? But they want product leaders to bring that knowledge in. They're looking for people. They're hungry for information. And if you're not able to offer that, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. So I encourage everybody to really understand what the tools are, what they can learn, what is possible, and then go and actually build things and test it and deeply understand it. I wouldn't say that I'm an AI expert still to this day, but now I understand what it means to be AI native. Like now I'm working on my own tool to actually manage sales leads. And it's like so interesting to actually build the thing that you want to build and see it come to life. And I think we often just assume that you can't do something when actually the possibilities are limitless. And so I encourage everybody to just learn. Take this and, if you don't have AI on your resume, you need to find a way to at least learn and understand it. If you can't, I think you're going to miss out on the next revolution. It's like saying, okay, well, and by the way, I said this when I was on Facebook. I'm like, look, I'm a desktop and so I'm a desktop PM. I don't do mobile. And they asked me to work on mobile ads. And I was just like, I don't do ads and I don't do mobile. But that's a big thing. Like, if you don't do that, what are you doing? Right. And so I had to learn it. Right. And we built the first, successful mobile ad product. I didn't know anything about ads or mobile, but I had to learn because that's like what the company needed at the time. And I think it's easy to look at this revolution and say, well, I'll dabble here, but it's going to come in a much stronger way than you in 2 years, 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've learned that it's so critical to be able to embrace that new thing. We always talk about the example from desktop to mobile. And then, this is another shift with AI. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on some of the things about you or some of your other personal stories. But I guess in your past, like what are some of the experiences that have come in handy, but you never expected them to be useful?
And that's a good question. So here's the thing that I think is that things that the thing that makes you who you are today is a mosaic of everything that and every experience you've ever had. And so one of the things that actually, for example, I was talking about Facebook Marketplace. The thing that made me see what it was I was the only PM who was a woman PM who was a mom in the entire company.
Wow.
And so I could see something that was like so possible. And yet also because I grew up in a small town and my parents weren't that wealthy, I remember saying something at one of the executive meetings, like, well, and then I bought a used refrigerator and someone's like, we don't pay you enough to buy a new refrigerator. And I'm like, that's not the point. But yeah, like I just did things that like were very different than everybody else because I grew up kind of poor and I grew up in a small town and, and I'm like super frugal. My kids fly basic economy. It's the bus. But I realized that like the culmination of everything that you have helps you see the opportunities that other people don't see. And if you either trust those instincts or not. And so there's so many things about like how I grew up. Like community is so important, like local community, so many places. We live in a very, very wealthy area. So people don't think, oh, I want to buy a used scooter. Because you could just buy a new scooter. Also, that I bought a bunch of used scooters from Facebook groups And then I actually resold them. And so I think a lot of times your whole past leads up to what it is. And you don't think, oh, I'm going to accumulate this set of experiences so that I can have this deck of cards when the time comes. But, and the fact that, I have a lot of friends in Asia, they buy and sell on profiles. Like I could see commerce happening in a way that very few people at the company could see, which is why I was really pushing for a big push in commerce and Facebook Marketplace and those types of things. And I think the other thing is like, a lot of what your life story is and experience is what resonates with other people. And so can you like draw on experiences? So, when I was in Ancestry, I talked a lot about like, trying to document my mom's, pictures before she passed. And I called it the Someday Project. And actually I said, the problem was someday becomes never. And, I didn't finish that project before she passed. And so I encouraged a lot of people to say, hey, look, like, how do we turn someday into today for our customers? Because they all want to do this someday when they have time, but sometimes you run out of time.
That's amazing. You just noted that down. I think we'll have to add that one to, our words of wisdom from Women in Product and from Deb Liu. Okay, so what is one aspect of work that you genuinely dislike? And how do you change it?
Okay, so I was having dinner with some of my team that we all used to work at Meta, but only one person is left. And she was just talking about the review cycle and what they call PSC, the ratings, like, and all of the rest of us who had now all left. This is my old team. They were like, we are so glad we're not going to. I think so much of corporate life is like important in some ways, but it doesn't yield what you're looking for. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like almost the performative nature of like, so we used to do like 20, 30 hours of calibrations. And like we move like 2 people from one bucket to another, and it's like 150 people. And at what point was every manager in this organization sitting down for 20 to 40 hours for the time, as opposed to, I don't know, building products, right?
Right.
Things like that where, and again, I don't think it was unique to any specific company I worked at. Every company had this problem, which was like too much or too little. How do you do performance management without it being a tax? But there's so much about corporate life where it's almost like, it's like, calibrations and promotions, and you want to make sure it's fair, but at the same time, it's like getting feedback is, so much work. And you have people, they would request like 13 people to give them feedback.
Right.
If you find 13 times everybody in the company and, things like that, where just, it felt like it, talking about the work was like more important than doing the work sometimes. And that's what I worry a lot about is, this is why companies and industries are ripe for disruption. It's because suddenly the budgeting process is like this crazy 2-week long thing. I remember I was working at one previous company where like we never got the budget in on time. And I'm like, so if the budget never gets in on time before January, then like, why don't you just set the deadline as the end of January? Like, what's the point of pretending that we're gonna have a budget when we have never had a budget? And so, it's things like that where the performative nature of a lot of corporations, I worry, slows us so much. And so how do we, and I hate those things, right? And so how do we reduce that so that it's more about the work that we do as opposed to like all of these other things?
Exactly. So what is the problem that we really need to solve, and what's the best way to do that and to not have it be performative? I agree with you. It's almost like everyone knows, like during this time frame, organizations are in performance reviews. So you're not going to get their attention. You're not going to be able to interact with them. And same with like everyone's going into like budget cycle. While needed, we already know that there's a big block of brain space that's being put into those. So it's a good one. So another question. So, we've talked about AI, we've talked about learning AI, what it means to be AI native. So for you personally, what would you want AI to do for you?
Well, so, it's interesting. And I encourage people to AI native, and I still need to write this article about like, imagine that, the things that we think we take for granted today, if I had asked you like 20 years ago, it's like you'd be able to look up anything on the phone and have a map on your phone that takes you to a place. Is that something that people would have said 20 years ago?
No.
Right? Yeah, I used to print out MapQuest maps, and from Yahoo, like that was like a revolution because it used to be at physical, right? So the physical map to they, actually being able to see it online and print it out was like revolutionary. And then it was like, oh, there's these like, these GPS tools in your car.
Well, I had that too.
Okay. So like, there's like a TomTom or something.
Yeah, I think I had a Neo or something like
Yes.
that.
So it was super expensive. We bought one for my parents because it got lost all the time. And then that kind of went away because now it's in your pocket. And so I think we can't even imagine what's possible today. Because if I asked you when you're looking at physical maps, like, would you want a device that basically you can make calls on and you can order a car and food and it could take you places and it will tell you
Yeah.
exactly where you are in any given city? You would just be like, what? And, if you give it long enough, technology almost seems like magic.
Yeah.
And it's, it's like the first time you use ChatGPT, the first time you played with Gemini, it's like suddenly, whoa, what is possible? Right. And so one of the things I think a lot about is like, we don't know what that thing is yet. And that's okay. In every revolution, there is a turning point. So the part of my talk that I do to board leaders is and the internet, physical stores were like, what do you mean you just order stuff and it shows up at your house? I mean, that's it's like a catalog, right?
Yeah.
They used online, they used the online channel like it was a catalog. So it was like the Sears catalog. But they never really got it to like a delightful experience. Amazon was able to do that, right? It's like 2-day delivery. Like, it's easy.
Yeah.
It's like, those types of things. And then it was like, with mobile, it wasn't like the hotel companies are the ones who benefited the most. Like now you have Airbnb, you have like Uber, the taxi companies then go, okay, we're going to go online. But instead it's really like, these new technologies open up so much opportunity to things that you couldn't have imagined. And I think we can't even imagine what's possible in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. Having kids who are learning how to drive, I kind of can't wait for me not having to drive anybody anywhere. So, I'm all
My
about.
kids are like sure that self-driving cars will solve the problem of having to learn how to drive. And we're making them learn how to drive. And they're like, Waymo's here in our town. We're done. And I'm like, no. It is not going to go every place. And I am sick of driving you 45 minutes to X tournament. I have to drive back and then go get you. So, I mean, it is possible. And yet, things come, I remember when my son was 11, he's like, I said, you'll drive my car someday. And we were sitting in the Hyundai. And then he said, by the time I learn how to drive, self-driving cars will be everywhere. He's 19 now. He's driving my Hyundai. So there you go.
Well, I will say that mine is, I'm going to take them to the parking lot this weekend and he's 19. I think he's really literally waiting for him to not ever have to be able to.
My daughter's waiting us out. She he basically said, are you sure Waymo just opened up in our town? And I'm like, I'm sure. So we'll see. I mean, I think it's kind of the race of technology. She's like, why am I learning this when technology's going to outstrip it? She's closer than he was. And my youngest might never have to learn how to drive, I guess.
That's right. I mean, if they put the tech into cars anyway, they only need to know the basic rules. So, great. Well, so as a sort of closing reflection, as you look ahead, are there any leadership or sort of in the product space questions that you're actively wrestling with or that you think about? And maybe it's something that you will write about.
Yeah. Well, I think the question is this: what does leadership look like when what you're managing is not as well defined anymore? That success is not as well defined anymore. That the tools are, people shape tools and then tools shape people, right? If you look at, and that's absolutely true in how like technology works. Basically people adapt to what tools they have and then they build tools to adapt to the environment that they have. And I think this is true both in the, Stone Ages and even now as we look forward. And so I think the biggest thing about leadership is how do you get people aligned and inspired for a common purpose? And how do you do that at a time when it just feels so fraught? I think that everyone feels so much uncertainty and industries are changing so fast right now that, I think that I worry about a lot of industries and people getting left behind because they're just not ready for that. And so that is something which, if you think about, like we were just talking about Waymos, right? Like there is no car behind the wheel. You have to employ way fewer people, but a lot of people drive those cars. What happens to that? What happens next when they go and do delivery? And What happens when, I think here's something like trucking is the number one job in like something like 20 states or something. What happens when you get point to point and that job is going away? I think we're going to wrestle with a lot of societal change. And it's something that we should really think about what that means on both a micro and macro level. Because, you know, like, for example, I remember talking to the partners. I was at Boston Consulting Group, and they said, we used to actually use slide rules and light boxes and draw all of the charts ourselves. They're like, you're so lucky you have Excel and PowerPoint. And now you can just plug in all the information and they will just like create slides for you, right? So there was we had a pool of people who wrote slides for us.
Yeah.
Are those people getting bits in the new world? I don't know the answer to that, right? And so again, it's the adaptability and understanding and upskilling that's going to be really important.
Yeah. And hopefully seen as the opportunity and maybe like an improvement in some of the way of life. Because a lot of the things when I asked you about what are the things in organizations or that you don't like, how can we make those things better? And hopefully we can look at things and
AI can take over PSC.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. It will do it on its own. So Deb, thank you so much. I have to say, like, one of my personal stories was I remember reading your book. I didn't really know about you. I didn't really know about women in product at the time. I think I was in between roles, and I felt that, Take Back Your Power was just really speaking to me. I said, hey, wow, this is a lot of my life, and these are a lot of the insights that I need to hear. And so today was really amazing. You've continued to do that. You bring such a mix of your strategic mind and the clarity, and just your honesty is amazing. And I hope that our audience really enjoys this discussion as much as I have. And I thank you so much for your time.
And thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening. This podcast is an original production of Women in Product. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the Women in Product YouTube channel. Leave us a review so that others can discover us, or share this episode with others. Original music provided by Jimmy Hahn.